Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the live review of GM Mythic Emulator Part 2, the second, Part 2. Part 2 for the French people out there. That is 2. Part 2. There is a Part 2 because when I started to do the first review, it was too much. There was too much stuff to talk about. Too much exciting stuff to talk about. So I decided to split everything into two parts. And this particular version is going to be just on, or rather, the first part was done just for my patrons and channel members. And then I put up sort of an edited version. But this time is going to be for everybody. Yay! So if you are a subscriber to the channel, you can chat in the window. And I see there's a whole bunch of people here already. Hello, all. Hello, everyone. I will be giving priority to the channel subscribers, the channel members rather, and also my patrons, my patrons, my Patreon. So I'm just going to be checking for that as we go. So before we do get into the review of the second part itself, I just want to do, I just wanted to ask, or rather answer a couple of questions here. So Stephen Benham, one of my patrons, asks, "Hey Trevor, will you be using the new updated Mythic for Season 4? Not that he's pushing me for Season 4, which is good, because Season 4 will come in time when I'm ready. But the answer is I'd love to, because I'm really excited about this new version of Mythic, and I'm really excited that everything's all put into the same spot, which is really great. But I don't know what system I'm using yet. There's a few contenders. I've been sort of narrowing it down. But it depends on the system. So if I do wind up using a system that already has a built-in Oracle, kind of like an Ironsworn kind of thing, then I probably won't use Mythic. But considering that most of the contenders don't seem to be in that direction, it's probably a good bet that in fact I will. But anyway, so that is my answer for you, Stephen. And I think we have someone else who's saying something here. Moses says, "What do you like most of Mythic 2e compared to the first edition?" Well, like I said, we haven't actually got through the second half yet, but I will say that it is everything put into one place, which is cool, and all of the optional tables there to give you optional details is really good. And of course, that's going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. So, hello, everyone. Hello, all of my. I see there's a bunch of channel members here in the chat as well, so that is cool. NVR Fear says, not sure if I've asked about this, but any chance we'll see Delta Green on the channel? Well, I did do a Delta Green Sage's Library episode. I think it was my last Sage's Library episode. I haven't done one in a while. I'm going to have to do another one. So I talk about Delta Green. In terms of actually playing Delta Green on the show, who knows? Anything's possible. I'm actually running an actual live game right now with some people up in Vancouver, which is really hard because they're getting their butts kicked. Anyway, let's get on with our show here. So we're picking up with Variations, which is essentially the second half of the book. So the first half, in the review that I did, talked about how to use Mythic. It talked about the basic systems. It talked about a couple of variants that they've built into the system since the 2006 or whenever it was that it first came out, especially with regards to altered scenes. I thought there were some really interesting things there. And then we discovered that there was all these optional charts to be able to help you to flavor certain things. But then now we get into the Variations chamber, or section rather. I will say that going through this, first of all, the blanket statement is that this is great. This is a fantastic supplement. The set of tools used here is super useful. Now, that said, there's a bunch of things in here that I think are really well done, but I know they're not for me, but for reasons I'll get to. But I do think that they're going to be very helpful for a lot of you out there. So let's have a look at this here. Variations. This section here just talks about, well, the variations. It talks about how to get prepared for a solo adventure. This is pretty handy if you've never done a solo thing before and you don't know how to organize your thoughts or your notes. This is really cool. And in fact, Tana, the author, says here under papers, please, talking about, for my own games, I make a habit of taking all the books and resources I'm using and stacking them together so I can put them on a bookshelf in between my adventures. And when it's time to play, I grab the stack, arrange on the table, and away I go. That is exactly what I do. When I'm doing a season of the main show on this channel, I have the stooks. I have the stacks of books of the supplements that I'm going to be using, and they always just stay right near the table, so I always know they're there. But anyway, so this is really cool because it gives you a lot of different ideas on how to organize yourself, where to get some ideas. Also, here we've got some online resources which lead you to the Word Mill Games website and all this stuff. So this is really good stuff, but I'm not going to dwell on this too much. They talk about how to record your adventure. Maybe some of you journal, and here's some thoughts on how to journal, or blogging. You know, you see a lot of solo blogs out there, and novelization. That's a big one. That's a tough one because that's a lot of work. But I've said before that the Mythic emulator is a great tool for authors and for writers as well as, you know, game masters or players, because I could see me sitting down and writing a novel using Mythic, right? And just using Mythic. I mean, that's essentially what I did in seasons 1 and 3 of the show, except that it was, you know, attached to a game. But anyway, it's just interesting. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. So let us go to the next section, because this is cool. So determining NPC statistics. So this section is kind of interesting because this section kind of does what Une does. Une is the universal NPC emulator, which I've used a lot on the show. Une is a great tool in that it tells you, you know, what is the nature of the NPC, what do they do, what's their relative power level. In my version of Une, which I think is the first version from way back in the Stone Age, there was even a component there about what to talk, if they want to talk about something, what's the nature of the conversation they want to bring up. I don't know if that's in the second edition. Somebody told me that in the newer versions of Une that's not there, but I could be wrong about that. But here we have Mythic kind of pulling double duty and giving us some stuff that Une does sort of traditionally. So determining NPC statistics, just, you know, talking about literal statistics like, you know, what kind of damage do they do in a fight if you're fighting, I don't know, like some sort of monster and you want to know whether they're, you know, more or less powerful than expected, then you can use these tools to do that. Asking Mythic using the fate chart to do that as usual. You totally do that. This is an interesting section here, getting the most out of source books. We're going to come back to NPC generation actually a little bit more because there's more stuff later in the book about that. This is just an interesting section on how to incorporate the many source books you might have. And the source books don't necessarily have to be RPG supplements. They could be anything, right? Anyway, it's an interesting section here to talk about that. Really, lots of ideas that I hadn't thought of before, so well worth having a look at this stuff here. Populating lists. So as we know from the first section of the book, the first half of the book, lists is one of the big important parts of how to use Mythic. You've got your character lists and your thread lists, and this just goes into more detail about how to use source books and such in order to help populate your lists. Lots of stuff in here. Again, I'm not going to go over it too much, but let us move on to books as random tables. This was kind of cool. What was this? So the example is, let's say you've chosen an RPG about space exploration as your source book, like a Traveler or something. So to get inspiration for your adventure, you roll a random page and land on a section about the various colonies found throughout the settled galaxy. You can use this information as inspiration for the world your player character comes from. This is basically the equivalent of saying, where do I want to go in the world, and closing your eyes and throwing a dart at the map. And that's where I'm going to go. I actually wound up going to Vietnam back in the 2000s because of that. I literally threw a dart at the map and went, oh, I guess I'm going to Vietnam. I was an adventurous sort back then. Anyway, so that's kind of what this is here, which is kind of neat. Again, this isn't really an essay on stuff, but it's essentially like in essay form in terms of this is how to think more about how to structure your adventures and such. Anyway, very, very cool stuff here. But now I want to get to the thread progress track. The thread progress track is, for all intents and purposes, the same kind of thing we use to track vows in Ironsworn. So I presume that that's where this comes from, but I'm not sure about that. But the point is, it's a very useful tool. What does this mean? Well, it means that you can choose a thread to focus on. So, for example, like in Ironsworn, in the second season of my show, which I used Ironsworn, Arn had a vow which was like the big vow, the whole focus of the entire season. And I'm not going to say what it is in case some of you haven't seen the season for whatever reason, but what in acting we call that the super objective, which means what does the character ultimately want? What is everything ultimately focusing on? What is everything ultimately driving towards? So you could call it like the main point of the campaign, right? Everything else is kind of side adventures, and they will link up and they will, help inform things, but everything's always driving towards that main thread or vow in Ironsworn. So this one is essentially that you take a thread that you want to focus on, so something that you think is important, something that interests you, whatever the case is, and you create a thread progress track. And there's 3 different types. There's 10 point, 15 points, and 20 points. So the longer or the more points involved, the longer that thread is going to take to accomplish. Okay, so what that means is basically every time you encounter something in the adventure, in the game, in the session, that in some way moves towards that thread, then you mark progress. So if something happens in the adventure, which you think, I think this moves the character towards a greater understanding or take some concrete steps on how to achieve this goal, then you mark 2 boxes, okay? And basically the idea is once you get to the 10 or the 15 or the 20, depending on the length of it that you've chosen, then that is completed. The thread is completed. So, and there's little details in here about flashpoints and stuff, which is kind of cool. Basically what a flashpoint is something exciting and dramatic that happens. So if you look at the 10-point track here, there's 10 points, and then there's this box here that says, did a flashpoint happen? And then on box 5, it says flashpoint. So what that means is if you're making progress and nothing really dramatic or as exciting has really happened yet, then by the time you get to the 5th box, that sort of forces an exciting encounter to happen. So it keeps the action up, right? Which is kind of neat. And again, that can mean whatever it means to you based on the context of your adventure. But here, like if you run into a flashpoint incident before you get to box 5, you would just mark this box right here. Did a flashpoint happen? So that you would know you don't have to do it again on point 5. You know what I mean? So if you got to box 3 and a flashpoint scene just naturally happened, you won't have to do it again on 5. So it's not, it's not forcing you into an endless series of chases or whatever it's going to be. So that is basically how the thread progress track works. Now, here's what I like about the thread progress track is that it does keep you focused on what you think is important to the game. And again, in Ironsworn, when you have that sort of super objective, that big vow, I am going to save the town by doing this thing, and you know that that's going to take a long time to do, that always keeps you in your mind, always driving towards that goal. And I believe it subconsciously as well helps you subconsciously pick things when you're interpreting results on charts to move towards that goal. It channels and harnesses your own imaginative capabilities to go towards that goal. So that's what I like about this, is that you can say, what I've decided in this is that this thing is going to be important. So for example, in season 3 of my show, I start Edbert on a beach on a tropical island with no memory of how he got there at all. Now, there was a couple of threads that he starts with that he brought with him from season 1. One of the threads was deal with Sherilyn, find a way to permanently deal with Sherilyn. The other was find out what the hell you're doing on this beach and where you are. And the other was deal with the Order of the Purifying Flame that he knew was chasing him. But that's all I knew. So I could have said, with this system, I could have said, okay, that thread about find a permanent solution for Sherilyn, I could have said, okay, that's going to be my thread focus, right? That's going to be a thread. I'm going to make a thread progress track. I'm going to make it big and long. I make it, like 20 points kind of thing. So I know it's going to take a while to get to. I could have done that. And that would have been cool because that would have focused everything, always keeping in mind we're driving towards this is sort of the most important thing, right? However, this is why this system doesn't really work for me. This system is kind of a heavy-handed way of forcing the story in a certain direction. Now, you choose it. So, you choose where you want it to go. So it's not like some outside force is doing it. But Oh, thanks for the $20, Willona's Cave. Thank you very much. That's channel member Willona's Cave. Very much appreciate that. Great job with this review, Trevor. Well, thank you. We'll see. We'll see how it goes as we go along. But anyway, so this system kind of forces a narrative outcome. Kind of. It channels you in a very directed way. Now, for me, that doesn't work very well for me because and this is just my personal preferences. This has nothing to do with the tool at all. The tool is very good. But I prefer to be surprised all the time. So when I start out a season of the show, and I put those threads there, I knew that Edbert wanted to find a way to deal with Sherilyn. But if I had a chart like this, it would have forced me to abandon certain other threads. It would have forced me to possibly end the thread before I was ready to, or it might have forced me to, it might have put me in a situation where the chart says that the thread is closed because I've filled in all the boxes, but I'm not ready yet. I know that narratively speaking, there's other things. So I don't want to give away the ending here, but basically in the last episode, for those of you who've seen the last episode of season 3, there was a thing that happened in which Edbert confronted that thread, which was find a way to deal with Sherilyn permanently. Now, those of you who've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But imagine now if I had, imagine in that moment, I had a progress chart, and it was a 20-point progress chart, but I was only on 14. Well, narratively speaking, in that last episode, it felt very, very right that this was the end of that thread. But if I was going technically by the rules with this chart, it wouldn't be over yet. And that would piss me off. Now again, you're running your own thing. You can do whatever you want. You can suddenly ignore the chart and say, whatever, it's done. You totally can. But here's the thing. When I have these extra rules put upon my situation, like not only am I worried about running the game and figuring out the narrative, but now also I've got this other set of rules on top of everything that says, and now there's this thread progress track to help you keep your thoughts contained and channeled. I know me. And one of my failings is I get obsessed with the details of rules and I don't want to do it wrong. So I'm afraid that I would be more concerned with getting this subsystem right than I would be with just letting the narrative flow, okay? And again, that is not a criticism of this tool. That's criticism of me. That's a personal failing. But I'm doing the review, so I'm telling you, how it impacts me because that's my experience. But if you are someone that maybe doesn't have an intrinsic sense of narrative flow, I mean, remember, guys, I've been in showbiz my entire life. I've been working in Hollywood for 22 years. I'm a professional writer. I understand sort of intrinsically by this point what makes a beginning, middle, and end satisfying. So a lot of you don't have that experience. And so these tools are really helpful for people who need a little assistance to help channel their thoughts. And if you are one of those people, this thing is great. It's a little more bookkeeping, but it's pretty minor in the big picture. I'm making a big deal out of it just because my own brain says, there's a new subsystem, I have to get it exactly right. But anyway, so that's that. So it's very useful, but it's not something I see myself using in the future. But then again, that said, you never know till you try, right? You might actually, or I might actually have a good experience with it. So I really should try it at least once. You got to try something before you can make a judgment on it. Anyway, so that's what this is here. It continues giving more description about what flashpoints are and things like this. All right. So we talk about timing progress, discovery checks, all this kind of stuff. If this subsystem interests you, then this section alone will be very, very be worth the price of admission, so to speak. Okay, so let's get past this now. And right. This is it here. So Tana talks about plot armor. The goal of the thread progress track is to give Mythic a way to help you progress toward the completion of a thread. While the end is achievable, you have to reach milestones, which I believe is the term that is officially used in Ironsworn, along the way, such as flashpoints to get to it. This means you can't resolve the thread until you've reached the full amount of progress points and engaged in the conclusion. And plot armor is the rule that protects the thread until you reach the conclusion. So it's context that says the thread cannot be resolved until the conclusion, so you can't end it early, according to this system. Now, right away I was tinkering with an idea of how to end it early. I was thinking, what if, see, that's something I really like about the Ironsworn system or version of this, is that let's say you've got a 10-point box for the vow, right? And you're at 7. But something happens narratively in there that makes you feel, I think I did it. I think this is the end of the vow. So you have an option then of rolling dice against that, and maybe you're right. Maybe it is the end of the vow. But if you fail the roll, there's a consequence to it. I really like that because it allows you the option to say, you know what, this just feels like it's over now. Whereas this, so far in this version of Variations, we don't have that option. There is no option to end it early, at least not that I saw. Again, it's super easy to add in. I was even thinking something like you can roll 1d10 plus 5, you can roll 1d10 plus the amount of progress points you have, and if you get 15 or more, then you've ended the thread early. If you wanted that option, and with some consequences for failing that roll. So, for example, I say plus 5 and 15 because, or I say the progress points in 15 because. If you've got a 10-point thread and you need to get 15 on a D10 roll, well, obviously you can't do that unless you add plus 5 to it, which is, in that case, half the progress track. So it basically saying, until you've achieved at least half the points, you can't even try to end it early, which makes sense to me. But anyway, so the point is that it's an easy house rule to make to try and end that early as an option. And maybe that's not even an interest to you guys. But to me, that's something that I think of. Anyway. All right, let's have a look at the chat here before we move on to the next point, which is a cool point talking about diversifying threads. So, all right, where are we here? Let me scroll way back. I'm just gonna have a look at who has joined us. Lots of stuff. Okay, so let's look at our members in the chat here. Boy, lots of folks here. So Envy Fear 1911 says, I find stat check to be slow. I just go with a gut feeling in May. Oh, is this? I find stat check to be slow. I just go with a gut feeling, and Maze Rat's my system of choice. Stats for NPCs, enemies are easy to whip up, so not all that useful for me. Yeah, that's perfectly fair. When I was doing the first season of the show, I was using Savage Worlds, and a lot of people ask me, well, how did you know how to stat up the monsters? Well, Savage Worlds makes that really easy. You just kind of go, I kind of think this is the way it is, and maybe it's got this power, and away you go, right? So there's you couldn't do that in like Pathfinder, because Pathfinder is all about the exact balance. And there's like special formulas you use to make the exact balance, whereas Savage Worlds, no, it's totally, it's relaxed and laid back. You just wing it, man. Anyway, what else have we got here? What sort of a dungeon generation do you prefer, room by room or theater of the mind? How to decide whether you found what you're looking for in the dungeon. Again, I've kind of done both ways. In Season 1, I used the Perilous Wilds dungeon generator, which was kind of room by room, which I really enjoyed. In Season 3, I used the Adventure Crafter, which goes hand in hand with Mythic here. I didn't have as much fun with that one, but I'll talk about that a little later because we get to how to incorporate the Adventure Crafter into this supplement. So that's cool. All right, where are we here? Where are we here? Some more. Panos says, I have seen you use multiple generator products. I suppose that through use you have selected some to use mainly, but how do you keep track of what to use and when? I find myself that having more than a couple of products takes a lot of time to find a specific table to use. You're absolutely right. And one of the things you have to be careful when you're doing this solo thing, or even when you're running a game with live players and you're using randomizers and supplements, you have to be careful you don't give yourself choice paralysis. You can't have too many things at the table, or else exactly that will happen. You'll be like, I don't know what to use, especially when a lot of supplements have very similar generators. Like I was using the Book of Random Tables, which is great, but then I started using the Tome of Adventure Design, and there's a lot of crossover in terms of the genre and the feel of certain things, so I would kind of forget, like, wait a minute, what's in what? And that slows you down, and it can break your rhythm. So you do have to be careful. The one I use the most, for those of you who have seen my show, Season 1, I used a whole bunch, all over the place. That was easier to do because I was using a system a game system, Savage Worlds, that I was very familiar with. In Season 3, I was using Dominion rules, which is a lot more crunchy, and there's a lot more going on. So to also add a whole bunch of supplements on top of that would have been way too much. So I kept it down to a minimum. I think I had like the book of random tables for names and stuff like that. And then Mythic, really. So much can be done with Mythic. And now with this second edition, even more so. Like this book, once it's for me, I like a hardcover book, like a thing I can hold in my hand and flip through, as opposed to a PDF. I just find it more useful. But for me to have everything in one book, that clears up so much. That clears up so much potential hassle there. Ellie VA says, do you have any thoughts on how to make the progress track more mutable, like ad hoc shortening or lengthening of the track as unexpected moments happen? Well, again, I would encourage you to have a look at the second edition sections in there about thread progress tracks, because they go into a lot of detail about exactly how to handle that kind of stuff. So I will let the author answer that question. Wilderness Cave says there's an updated version of the Perilous Wilds now. Yes, the author actually emailed me and let me know, and I now have that, so that is great. That's such an excellent supplement, too. I might have to do a deep dive review on that one of these days, too, because it's really cool. Okay. Envy Fear says, any thoughts on the Fate role-playing game? I do. I have many thoughts, and I'm not going to share them now. I will eventually talk about that game on the Sages Library. The JML gave me a little tip, and it's in pounds, so you're a Brit. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I'll tip it a cap to you. Okay, let us move on with the diversifying thread section. This is basically a little tip, which I really like. The little tip basically says, if you have a thread that comes up, like in this case, it's about a starship captain that's taking this scientist to a planet and to get him there safely, essentially, okay? So the thread is transport the scientist. There you go, right? Simple. All done. Well, it could be, or you could split the thread up into smaller components, so smaller sort of constituent parts, like perhaps you transport the scientist, but also there's find out why he's being hunted, and then avoid the syndicate, which is like a group of pirates, right? And I really like that because it allows you to expand the thread into sort of a proper adventure. So if, I don't know, what's a good example? I'm trying to think of an example of something from my own show. I can't remember any right now because, who watches that? The point is you can take a thread that looks very simple on the surface, but extrapolate a few extra things out of it just to kind of tease out some new information and some new opportunities to have adventure within that thread concept. So I really like that. That's a really great tip. Resolving character versus player knowledge. This is a section about what do you do when the player knows that there's a danger on the other side of the door, but the character doesn't. Now, this has never been a problem for me. I am able to very easily separate character from player knowledge. But basically, this is a bunch of tips on how to do that. Again, I'm not going to go too much into this because basically my method of doing it is the fourth one that's listed here, knowledge as a roleplay opportunity, which just basically means I like to engage in the systems of the RPG game that I'm using. So let's say it's Savage Worlds. Let's say that in the first season, Simon of Argostan and company is in a dungeon or an ancient temple or wherever they were. And I, as the GM, right, I determine, this is a room full of traps ahead of them. Well, Simon has no way of knowing that. Or does he? Well, he does if I give him a perception roll or whatever it's called in the game. Right? So I would treat that exactly as I would treat it if I was running a game with live players. If I know that there's a room full of traps ahead, and I know that the players, maybe one of them has a really high awareness, I might make that skill check for that character, or I might get the player to do it. I'm more likely to get the player to do it. I like players to roll their dice in most cases. But the point is, I engage with the system, the RPG system mechanics, in order to help facilitate what's happening in Mythic, right? So if in that case, Simon made his perception roll before he steps in the room, wait a minute, he notices something is out of place, and it kind of, because he made the roll. So now we know he's not going to automatically fall victim to the trap. So those two knowledges, the player and the character knowledges, are separated. That's how I do it. There are other ways to do it, of course, and that's what this section talks about. Again, not really an issue for me. This tends to come fairly naturally to me. JML, who gave me the little tip, says, just wanted to say thank you for the great content you provide. Well, thank you for helping to support the show, and it is my pleasure to do this kind of stuff and all the stuff I do on the channel. Anyway, so this goes, this is just a really cool section where it kind of makes you think, like, wait a minute, what if I adjusted how I interpret events? What if I adjusted how I deal with character knowledge? Yeah, it's neat. Neat series of tips for that. Conclusive adventure conclusions. I think this is just making sure you know where your threads are going to lead and how to make sure your adventure ends conclusively and in a way you remember. A lot of people have an issue when they're doing this, that they get lost and they don't know what the character's doing anymore, and they're not sure, like, I don't even know. There's so many threads here, and I don't even know what I'm wanting, what I'm driving towards. Well, for me, again, I have that intrinsic, years of working in the animation industry, in the entertainment industry, so I understand very well the concept of beginning, middle, and end, and know when to find an end. I can sort of sense it, like, we're getting close now, it's time to find an end. I started to feel the end coming in season 3 around episode 18. I was like, yeah, I think we're getting close now. It just feels right. But this section here in this book gives you some pretty concrete advice on how to do that for yourself if you don't have the benefit of my experience. If you're not sure how to bring your adventure to an end. And, something very simple here, one of the simple suggestions here is basically, when you have an interrupt scene or a random scene show up, you choose the event focus and you make it move toward a thread. Because you've got your threads, you know that this is what's of interest to your character. So there's nothing wrong with saying the next random event is going to be move towards a thread. So that, again, it channels you back towards the things you've already established as being important, right? Anyway, a very, very useful to look at. Very useful indeed to look at that. And then we move to choose your chaos flavor. So a lot of people don't love the chaos factor for some reason. I have no problem with the chaos factor. I like the concept of the chaos factor. I like the idea that the chaos factor goes up and down based on whether or not the characters are in or out of control, because it changes the likelihood on the chart of whether you get extreme results or whether you get any result, right? Like, the higher the chaos factor, as we talked about in the first part of the review, the more likely of a yes answer. So what that means is things tend to start to get pretty wild as the chaos factor goes up. I really like that, but a lot of people don't. Or they want to adjust it in some way. So this is for them. This is how you would adjust it. You can use a mid-chaos fate chart, which just basically takes your chaos factors and groups them like this. So instead, like in the chart I use, the regular chart, each chaos factor from 1 to 9 has its own column. But this kind of streamlines things a bit. Now there's no difference between chaos factor 4 and 6. They all yield the same results. Where then, and then you've got the mid-chaos fate check. That's the alternate way of determining random or answers in Mythic. I don't use it because I'm a chart guy. I'm not an extra math guy. But then we've got the low chaos fate chart. This is the same thing, except it's now streamlined even more. Now results of 3 to 7 are all the same, right? So you're starting to get, when you're looking at these chaos charts, you're getting way less variation in terms of chaos. It's more about odds, right? Because we've got chaos on the bottom and odds on the going up and down. Or then you've got the no chaos fate chart right here, where these are for people that don't like any kind of chaos factor. They just want to know everything based on odds. Well, here you go. Again, I don't feel the need for this, but it's great that it's here because there's a lot of people who have said stuff like this, and so it has been provided, which is very cool. We're going to get into this keyed scenes idea in a second here, but I do want to go back to the chat and just see where we are. Okay, someone says, please put Easy D6 on your Sage's library. So I will say, I do have Easy D6, but I haven't played it. So Sage's library is not exactly a review show. Sage's Library is a show about games I have played and its experiences I've had with those games. I do the mailbag series, where that's where I talk about stuff that people have sent me or that I haven't played, because I do believe that there's those are two different focuses. If I've run a game or played a game, then I have some real world experience with it and I feel confident talking about it. Whereas if I'm only talking about it sort of, theoretically, because I've only read it, or maybe I haven't even read all of it, then I don't think it warrants a full Sages library. That's more of a mailbag episode. But I may get to it eventually. Believe me, the amount of games I have on my shelf, I don't have time in this life to play all of them, tragically. But okay, let's see what our Patreon is doing over here. Where are we? Okay, so no new questions on the Patreon, but we've got a bunch of stuff here. Not sponsored, not sponsored. It just happened to be in my fridge. All right. Looks like you guys are talking about your ideas on how to adjust certain, or to, kind of how to house rule certain things in the supplement, which is great. I mean, that's kind of the spirit of gaming, right? We all tinker with stuff, so that is great. Lemons says, if the Conjurer on the Beach is not featured in season 4, I'm going to be upset. Well, as I've said before, Conjurer on the Beach was just a my little ironic comment on what's happening with the OGL without actually making a comment on what's happening with the OGL. So it is not canon. Conjurer on the Beach is not canon. It is just a comedy version of Urazvath. Okay. All right, let us move on with keyed scenes. All right, so this is another way of establishing more narrative control beforehand over your adventure. A keyed scene, well, let's have a look at the wording here. Keyed scenes allow you to control your adventure in some interesting ways. For instance, keyed scenes could be used as another way to inject theme elements into your adventure. It could also be used to guarantee that certain things happen that you want to happen in an adventure. And I believe the example that gets used here is of a zombie post-apocalypse, zombie apocalypse kind of game. So the adventure, the example here is, let's say you're playing in this post-apocalyptic game and you're doing a solo game. It doesn't have to be solo, but we're talking about that. And you find yourself, your character's picking through the ruins of a city and going on, and you're kind of, you're scared because there could be zombies at any time. But, just by virtue of luck or in the outcome of the dice, whatever, there's no zombies. And you've done like 6 scenes and there's not a single zombie attack. Well, that starts to feel kind of less like a zombie apocalypse game and more like just a regular run-of-the-mill post-apocalyptic game. So you might say, well, I'm going to introduce the concept of a keyed scene. And this section goes into great detail about how you can do that. There's many options. But sort of a simple idea is you could say, okay, after every 3 scenes, I roll a d10. And if I get 1 to 3, there's a zombie. Now, that doesn't mean a zombie attack. It means whatever scene happens after that 3rd scene or whatever, however you set it up, it's going to have something to do with the zombie. Just to keep you, just to remind yourself that this is in fact a zombie apocalypse and not, a Fallout game or a Mad Max game or something like that. So that's an example of a keyed scene, but there are many, many others. It's a way for you to say, I really want this thing to happen, but I don't want to just say it happens. I want it to be a natural outcome of my own sort of narrative. It's a very useful tool. Again, I don't know if I'd use it myself. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm looking at season 1 and 3 of the main show, and I'm thinking, where could I put keyed scenes in there? I wouldn't do it just because, and only because, again, not a knock on the system at all. This tool is great. But for me, I like to be totally surprised all the time. I love not knowing. Like when Simon was hunting down the murderer in the city of Chiton, he didn't know who the murderer was, and neither did I. And that was awesome because I was discovering it as he did. Now, I could have done something like, okay, I'm going to put a keyed scene in there after, and it doesn't have to be, scene numbers. It could be, let's say you're keeping track of days of the week, right? And your character starts on Sunday. You could say, well, if the adventurers have not interfered with the serial killer by Wednesday, then he strikes again. And that's a keyed scene. If your characters don't stop the killer by a certain time, a keyed scene happens where he strikes again and kills again. Da, 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 da. I find that's a really useful tool if you're designing an adventure for other players. But for me, as a solo thing, it gets in the way of what I like about solo, which is being surprised. Again, that's just me. There are many people who like many, many different ways of doing things. This is really for people who have a very solid idea in their head of the kind of things that they want to see happen. I'm the opposite of that. I want to know nothing. Like I said, when I started season 3, I knew nothing. I knew that Edbert was on a tropical island and that there was pirates. That's it. That's all I knew. And it was awesome because I was like, ooh, I have no idea what's going to happen. But not everybody's like that. And if you're not like that, then these keyed scenes are really, really, really useful. And you can use them, in so many different ways. They talk about a keyed scene, the horror. This is a keyed scene designed to emulate your PC trying to hold on to their sanity in a horror adventure. So a very Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green kind of thing. So there's each of these things has a trigger and an event. It just means that the trigger could be, for example, if you look at set dungeon tone here, the trigger could be you roll 1 to 2 on a d10 each scene. At the end of each scene, or maybe at the beginning of each scene, you roll a d10, and if you get a 1 to 2, then boom, encounter a random wandering monster in the next scene, right? And you make these up yourself, right? You key them to things you find interesting. But over here, the horror, the trigger is count each scene where the PC experiences a horror, whatever that means to you. When the count reaches 5 or more, a roll of 1 to 3 on a d10 triggers the event, and the event is the PC is overwhelmed by what they experience. They must find emotional support. They can't engage in anything horror-related without attempting to flee. So basically, this is a situation where you're really focusing on the fact that characters are playing with their sanity in this, and that when really bad things happen to them, at some point, they're probably going to snap and break. Call of Cthulhu does this, Delta Green does this, but this is Mythic's way of doing it, without having to rely on the RPG system. So again, very, very interesting examples here. Really cool stuff. And random events. Yeah. Yeah, cool. And then we've got the key scene record sheet here. This book is chock full of this stuff. Sheets you can reproduce for yourself. And the best part is they're all collected at the end of the book, so they're all right there, and they're produced, and they appear multiple times in the book too. So it's really just as a source book. This is fantastic. Okay. Anyway, that's basically key scenes. Lots of details about key scenes going on in here. And then the next thing is Mythic with Prepared Adventures. We will come back to that in a second. Let's go to the phones and see here on the telethon. Is anybody else joining us? All right. What have we got? Thomas Rani says, I love the Chaos Factor's impact when using the NPC stats variation, more likely running into a more powerful character. Yeah. Again, that's something that Une did, right? You don't know the power level until you roll for it. I love all of that stuff. I love random. I love not knowing, but I think I've said that a million times already. So you probably know that. Okie dokie. Hilarious. People talking about how they want Conjure on the Beach to be canon. Well, it's not. It's not. It never will be. Okay, Midnight Master asks, any idea what to do if the adventure has stalled and you don't know how to continue? Well, this book talks about that very much in the threads section. It talks about exactly what do you do when you're not exactly sure what to happen. For me, I mean, I've said this in the video I did, 9 Tips on Solo Roleplay, which you can find on my supplemental playlist here on the channel. One of those tips is you have to make sure that your main character or characters have objectives. You need to know what they want. And just as importantly, you need to know what stands in the way for what they want, because that is the essence of all conflict. And without conflict, you have no drama. With no drama, you have no story, or you have no experience, right? If you have a character and you don't know, if you feel you've stalled out, it's because your character has no conflict. I guarantee you, there's a reason why. Who is it that wrote, the famous author that wrote, if you don't know what to do, suddenly guys with guns burst in? Raymond Chandler? I think it was Raymond Chandler. Well, there's a reason why he said that. Is because he knows, and anyone who understands drama and story knows that if your characters do not have a conflict to face, then they're boring, then they're dull. So I would submit to you that the reason why your adventure is stalled and you don't know how to continue is because your character is currently facing no conflict. So I would say to you, look at your thread list. What has happened already? There's going to be open threads there. This book tells you to do things like just your next random event, choose the focus. Or, when you have a next interrupt scene, choose the focus. Choose the focus to mean move towards a thread, dice randomly, interpret, and go. All you have to do to get your character moving is to throw an obstacle at them, right? Put their life in danger. Chase them up, have a bear chase them up the tree, right? Because now the character has to react, has to do something. It's much better if your characters are proactive. Characters who are proactive are always more interesting. But sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes they wind up reacting to events. But they have to have an event to react to. And that's contingent upon you as the player/GM if you're a solo person, and you as the GM if you're running for players. If your players are bored, it's because nothing's happening. It's because nothing is challenging their characters' wants and desires. And that is crucial. You need to know what the characters want so that you can hurl obstacles at them, right? Absolutely key. If you do that, it'll keep things moving. Anyway, so that's that. Behorn, channel member Behorn. Behorn? I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to say Behorn. I love the fact that there are loads of examples for everything in this book, as I've not played solo before. Well, yes, that's the thing I said in part 1 too, is that endless examples of stuff in here, which is so valuable. It really helped me in the first edition when I was learning this supplement way back in the day, that there was a section in the first edition called The Big Example, where they go through and they show you exactly. Well, at the end of every section of this book, there's a big example. And at the end of this book, there's a really big example that talks, like it goes on for like 12 pages or something. That's just one huge example of all of the systems presented in this book. I love a good example. Boy, oh boy, do I love a good example. So that is absolutely true. All right indeed. So here's a section that I'm not actually going to talk a lot about, using Mythic with prepared adventures. Why am I not going to talk about it? Because I've never done this. I have never used a prepared adventure in a solo situation, so I am no expert, and I'm no one to speak on this. However, if you want to know how to do it, it's right here in this book. This goes through all of the things you need to keep in mind when you are doing when you're running through a published adventure. I have to say, this is a bit of a mystery to me. As I said, I've never done it. I don't even know if I'd know where to start. But of course, that's what this book is for, is that it helps you figure that out. It tells you how to adjust Mythic so that it will help you play through the pre-made adventure. It talks about how to structure your scenes, where you get your context and content. There's a special list called Adventure Features, which is specific to running yourself through an existing module, basically, talking about how to end a scene. Because all of this is very different in a structured adventure. I would encourage you guys in the comments below to leave your experiences about, running pre-published adventures using Mythic, because I think it'd be fascinating. I've never seen it done, and I don't know how to do it. So, really cool stuff. And then we move on to, oh yeah, we're still in this. So it's a big section, and it goes into a lot of detail of how to do just that. And then we come to handling complicated campaigns. So this is basically advice on what to do when things are out of control, when you've got like way too many threads. There's so much going on. Oh my God. Basically, this whole thing talks about how to break up your campaign into manageable chunks. It's hugely useful. Again, it's stuff that I've kind of done instinctively. It talks about cleaning up your thread and character lists, because you're going to find a lot of the time, if you're in a complicated campaign, that at some point you're going to have threads and characters that just aren't really relevant anymore. It's not that the character is dead or something. It's just that they're not really relevant. So, for example, in season 3, there was a character named Slista who was a lizard man shaman. He had a very important role somewhere in the middle of the season, but as the season went on, his part in the story was basically over. So his name was on the character list, and I think at one point I did roll Slista as a focus of the event, the random event. And I may have even used it, but I remember after that thinking, I think I'm going to remove him from the list because his part of the story has been told. So you kind of prune the list, right? Or threads. You realize that a thread that seemed really important at the beginning of the campaign didn't really amount to anything, and there's no real consequences to not following it. That's okay. You just ignore that. Anytime you're running a really complicated campaign, there's going to be things that get dropped. I'm running a Vampire 5e game right now, set in a Vampire the Requiem setting, with my own kind of take on the lore. But that is a very complicated game, as you can imagine. That game is all about the internal politics of these vampires secretly running the city, right? And there are a ton of NPCs. They all have machinations. They're all working against each other. They're all screwing with what the players want. The players are screwing with them. And there is just so much going on. You really, really, really have to keep a very careful handle on it. Luckily, the Mythic tool is great. Even just the tool for keeping track of your lists and keeping track of your threads and your characters. Because when you do that, when you see it in black and white in front of you, you go, oh yeah, right. This is now cemented in my head that this character wants to do that, but that other character is working against them there, right? So that tangled web of political maneuvering can be kept track of, but it's hard to do. And when you're playing solo, it can get really overwhelming for a lot of people. So basically, this whole section talks about how to deal with that. Using the I don't know rule. In other words, what that means is when you roll something as a random event and it's a thread that doesn't really seem relevant and you go, I don't know how that works. Well, then that's your cue to get rid of that thread because it's obviously not that important. So all kinds of stuff, starting fresh, using multiple lists. Starting fresh just means we're purging the whole thing, starting again, sort of. It's more to it than that. Using multiple lists. So if you're, the example here is if you're playing a dungeon crawl game, but there's also a significant amount of stuff that's happening at the town outside the dungeon, right, in sort of classic D&D fashion. You might have a whole bunch of characters and threads that deal specifically with the dungeon, but then you've also got a whole bunch of characters and threads that deal specifically with the town. Well, there's nothing stopping you from splitting those lists so that when you're in the dungeon, you're dealing with the stuff that pertains to the dungeon, and when you're in the town, you're dealing with the stuff that pertains to the town. And there's nothing stopping those things from being on both lists, right? Like maybe somebody in the town is looking for an artifact in the dungeon. Well, that could very easily be on both lists. But it just allows you to sort of take the pressure off, organize your thoughts a little differently and break things up so that you're not overwhelmed by this huge list every time you need to roll a random event or something. So that's basically what this whole thing talks about, with lots of examples. As always, lots of examples. Tons of examples. Most of this book is examples. And then we come to peril points. Peril points. Oh, thank you, Richard Harrison. A posh cup of tea for you, sir, he says. And a very posh biscuit too, Dunkable. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for the £10, the £5. Appreciate it. While we're stopped, channel member NVR Fear says, did you cover Vampire the Masquerade in the Sage's Library? No, I will, but I'm scared of that one. I'm scared of that one. While we're on a little break here, we will come back to peril points in a moment. I'm scared of that one because that one has so much baggage with it. I will just say this. I had nothing to do with World of Darkness in the 90s. I knew it existed. I never played it. I never played it in the aughts, in the 2000s. I discovered the game really when New World of Darkness came out. So I get 2008, I guess, for me, was when I discovered the New World of Darkness. And I read the book, the sort of Mortals book, the base rules, and loved it. I was like, this is great. This is awesome. And then I got Vampire the Requiem and I fell in love. I was like, this is so great. It's so tragic what happens to these awful, awful beings. And I really fell in love with it. I never played it. I mean, I briefly ran a Mortals campaign in New World of Darkness, which was fun. But then, I moved to LA and all this stuff was happening. So it's only recently that I discovered Vampire 5e, which is Vampire the Masquerade, but 5th edition. And the reason why I'm scared to talk about this, not scared, the reason why I'm a little hesitant to talk about it on Sage's Library is because, as I said, the baggage involved with that particular game, there are so many old school World of Darkness Masquerade players from the 90s that absolutely hate anything that happened Requiem and beyond. And then there's the reverse. And then there's people that just hate the fact that they changed core systems in Vampire 5e, like the hunger dice mechanic. I hate that, they say. To me, I love it. I love the hunger dice mechanic. But I never played the original game. I was never interested in superheroes with fangs and katanas, the way that the game was very often portrayed in the 90s. My game is very, very personal, very, very horrific, very, very political. And I love it. I'm having a great time with it. And I will do it on Sage's Library. But I'm just, as I said, I'm just hesitant because there's so much baggage with that particular game. Anyway, that is that. Catalina. Hi, Trevor. Greetings from a Colombian fan for your solo adventures. Well, welcome. All the way from Colombia. Welcome. Anyway, let's see if there's anything on the Patreon here. I think most of my patrons are actually talking on chat, it seems, which is perfectly fine. I just won't necessarily know that it's you talking, because I can't see that on this chat. All right. Yeah, people do have, Human Era says people have strong opinions on Vampire the Masquerade and World of Darkness, so yeah, good to be careful. I mean, in the end, I don't give a damn. It's my game. It's my experiences. I don't really give a flying bleep what anybody else thinks. Frankly, if you're somebody, no, you're doing it wrong, that's not how I play it, thumbs down, dislike, unsubscribe. Well, to hell with you. Your opinion is less than meaningless to me. I don't do this to placate the lunatics in the world. I do this because I have a passion about it, and I love sharing the passion with people who can appreciate it. So, you know what? I've just talked myself into doing Vampire the 5e as my next Sage's Library. There we go. All right. Oh, Magnificent Devil says, a channel member, Magnificent Devil says, I knew some people who disappeared into a vampire LARP in the 90s and were almost never heard from again. That's awesome. Oh, RJ Walker says, hey, Trevor, I loved your voice work in the anime Great Pretender. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a fairly recent one. That was, I think we recorded that in 2020? I can't remember. Greetings from Germany, says Ulrich. Ulrich Lex. I hope that is your real name, Ulrich. You fit in with the Warhammer pantheon very nicely. God of Winter and Wolves. Awesome. All right. What are we doing here? We're not here talking about me. We're talking about Mythic. So let's get back to it. Boom. Peril points. Peril points are essentially what we used to call from Warhammer fate points. Fate. I'm sorry, I just got distracted by a comment. Jones says, haha, I just joined and thumbs down, I'm so... You just joined and thumbs down, unsubscribe was the first thing you heard. Well, sorry, that's not the tone of this channel at all. Sorry, that was your first impression. Anyway, talking about peril points. Peril points are basically fate points. They're basically get out of jail free cards, or points in this case. They're not quite like bennies in Savage Worlds. Bennies give you a reroll. Peril points are very blunt instruments to, as it says here, to save an adventure from an early end. So if you, in the middle of your game, and you're using Mythic, and something happens where the player, or rather the character, gets killed or is in a situation where they cannot get out of, and you're not really ready to say goodbye to the character yet, okay, you spend a peril point, and the situation is altered so that they don't die at that moment. A lot of games use this. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition introduced the concept of fate points to me back in '87, and I loved it. I was like, this is great. They were very they were very finite, so you only had a handful of them. Humans had more than dwarves or elves or halflings, but once you use them, they were gone. What it meant was, in Warhammer, fate has something else in store for you. And so you had these fate points, so that if you got killed by a random goblin cleaver, which happened all the time, you could spend a fate point to say that didn't happen. Very useful tool. It became a little crazy in later editions of the game, and especially in the Warhammer 40k versions of those games, like Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader. they started to give fate points to NPCs, which I was like, what? No. Fate points are specifically for the player characters. That's the purpose of them. You shouldn't have, precious NPCs with fate points that can survive players, spending resources and taking time to defeat them, only to have them, I used a fate point. That always drove me nuts. So they got a little out of hand, but they were very useful. And that's basically what peril points are. Again, in Savage Worlds, you have bennies, which are not quite the same thing. They're just rerolls, so they give you the opportunity to change the outcome of a bad die roll. I should also point out that I don't know the latest edition of Savage Worlds, whether they changed that, the Adventurers edition, Suede, because I played Deluxe edition, which is the version before that. So they may have changed bennies to do just this. I'm not entirely sure. But peril points is totally optional. Like everything in this section is totally optional. You can just spend a point to change the narrative, and you can decide. Is it like Warhammer, where you only get 3 points for your whole career and you're done? Or do you say, you know what? The character has 1 peril point at the beginning of every session. That's it. I would be more inclined to do that. It's a little get out of jail free card, but it's very limited. So you can screw up once, but if you screw up twice, you suffer the consequences. Now, also, don't forget, this is Mythic. So what happens to your character is defined entirely by the questions you ask the fate chart. So there's ways to mitigate the early death of your character through Mythic alone if you're worried about that. But sometimes you're playing a game with a high lethality, and like if I was playing Harnmaster or something and my character took a G5 wound to the head, I might want to spend that peril point, because otherwise that's going to, if it doesn't kill me outright, it's probably going to put me in the, in the healer's room for 6 months, right? So, it's a useful option to have, and it's totally up to you how to do it. So then we have using the Adventure Crafter with Mythic. Now, this is a great section, gives a lot of details about how to incorporate those supplements. I will say that I did use the Adventure Crafter in Season 3. It didn't work so well for me. Again, not a knock on the system. It's just, it didn't quite blend with the way I like to handle things, because I tend to play, as I've said, I like to be surprised by things. I like to know as little as possible going in, whereas the Adventure Crafter assumes that you're doing some pre-planning. Like, you're thinking about things like, okay, well, based on the nature of this dungeon, let's say, there's probably going to be, I don't know, giant rats. And there's probably, that's a common thing. So when I'm populating my monster lists, I'm going to put some giant rats in there at multiple points just to make sure they're there. That kind of goes against my personal philosophy. I don't want to know what's there until I see it, until it emerges from the dice rolls, from the randomness. That's the reason why my adventures tend to be way more random than a lot of published adventures, because I'm going with the flow. I try and keep things always grounded and always focused within the context of what's happening, because that is, of course, as I've said a million times, that is key. Context is absolutely key. But the Adventure Crafter sort of assumes that you have to do some work up front, and that's fine. It just doesn't really work for me. So again, this section is not of huge use to me because I don't really use the Adventure Crafter. But if you do, again, look at all the details on this, and it just really goes into great examples of how this works. Just great. And then we get to where to get more support. You can go to the Word Mill Games, the various social medias, the Patreons, and then we have the big example. And this goes on and on and on. It is an example from start to finish, and it tells you everything. It as far as I know, as far as I can tell, it goes over virtually everything we've seen in this book, and it's entertaining to read. You can see the process in motion, and you can understand the technical aspects of the process in motion as well. It goes on and on and on and on and on, which is great because it's important. All of this is important stuff, and you're following a character through the Mythic process, and you're seeing examples of how the charts get filled out. You're seeing all of this stuff happen through this example. And on and on and on. And it's great. And then we get to, boom, the rules summary. This is a summary of everything in the Mythic Game Master Emulator systems. Everything. All the basics. How to ask a fate question. How to use the fate chart. Or if for some reason you prefer the fate check, you must be some sort of crazy person who likes math. Then you can use that. how to deal with random events, how to use, Mythic RPG fate questions as your RPG rules, right? You don't need an additional system. You can do everything just on Mythic. How to roll on the lists, how to generate random events, how to come up with your first scene, your opening salvo of your adventure, so to speak. How to test a scene. What does an altered scene mean? How do you adjust the altered scene? How do you do interrupt scenes? How do you begin and end scenes? How do you do end of scene bookkeeping? Everything we've talked about in this book is all here. Details on the thread progress track, keyed scenes. It's all right at the back, right at your fingertips. You don't have to be flipping through the book. That is something I say about the Vampire 5e book. As cool as it is, the organization, it leaves a lot to be desired. Rules are buried in walls of text littered all over the book, which is not super helpful, but not the case here with Mythic. Everything we've talked about right here. And then the blank adventure journal, which of course you would print out and use. And the thread and characters list, same thing. And the fate chart, which of course you'd print out and choose. And all the tables in the book. Here they are. They just keep going and keep going. And you get the point, right? It just goes through, and then we get to our meaning tables, and this is all of the main tables of Action 1, Action 2. That's sort of the classic Mythic table. We get to the new descriptor tables, and then we get to the meaning tables. And this is where you get like 60 different tables, all based on details of whatever is the context. So if you're running a sci-fi thing and you want to describe an alien species that the character runs into, boom, many-eyed and colorful. Great. Boom. Awesome. Away you go. You run into an angry bear. What does it do? It's careless and it's mysterious. Okay, so it's careless and mysterious. It's mysterious because it's doing something unusual. It's careless. I think it's attacking you when it's really weak. And why is it really weak? Has it been wounded? There's a mystery there. Why is it so weak? But it's still attacking you. It's being very careless. It should know better. I'm just obviously making that up as I go. And it just goes on and 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 on. This is all compiled in the back of the book. So that is the Mythic GM Emulator 2nd edition. So what are my final thoughts on this before we go back to the chat? My final thoughts are, if you are a solo gamer, or if you are a GM looking to shake up your own game, shake up your own style a bit. Maybe you are a GM that's been at it for a while and you're getting a little bored with your own choices. That happened to me. That's happened to me several times over the years. I just get bored with me. I get bored with my own choices. I find myself slipping back into old habits because they're easy. This book can break that. If you follow this system, if you use this system as a GM with players, and whether you use it in real time at the table to randomly determine what's happening, or whether you use it to prepare adventures beforehand, you will find that this will break you of your own bad habits in many ways. If you're open to it, right? You have to be open to it. You have to want to. And for a solo player, this book basically takes the cake when it comes to supplements. Honestly, I could see me using only this book, the 2nd edition GME, and no other supplements in a whole season of the game. I could see that happening, right? Will that happen? I don't know. I'm a sucker for new supplements, so I doubt it. But I could see this being the only resource I need to run virtually any kind of campaign. So it is just excellent. It's all of the variations rules. It's all of the stuff that we found in the Mythic magazine and the evolution of the rules presented in the first edition of the game, all jam-packed into a book that is pretty reasonably put together in terms of its organization. There's a few things that I might have done slightly differently, but it's so minor it's not even worth nitpicking about. It's put together all in one place. Great examples of everything you need to know. And then all of the pertinent tables and charts are all gathered again together at the back of the book for easy and quick reference at the table. That is hugely important to me. All in all, 2 thumbs up. Love this product. Can't wait to get it in hard copy because, like a lot of you, as I'm seeing in chat, a lot of you preferred the actual book as opposed to the PDF, and I'm definitely in that camp. I find it easier to find things by flipping through pages than I do by trying to click around on a mouse, but that's just me. So I heartily recommend it, and if you're going to buy it, I also heartily recommend you buy it through the link in the comment section below the DriveThruRPG link, because I'm an affiliate, and if you do buy it through the DriveThruRPG link, then I get a little taste, I get a little piece of the pie. You know what I mean? It doesn't cost you any more, but it just sort of helps support the show. So that is a great way to support the show. We're not done here yet, but I do want to thank you all for joining me. If you've got to go. And also, please do subscribe and like the video if you haven't done that already. And, if you want to become a patron or join us here on YouTube, the channel membership is available. And, I sell handmade merchandise as well out of our own shop at memyselfandI.com, so you can check that out. Robert Larnack is that Australian $10? I think it is. Thanks for the review, Trevor. Love your channel. Thank you very much. If that is in fact an Aussie $10, thank you very much for that. Robert? Yeah, good stuff. Okay. I'm just going to see where we're at in the chat here before we say farewell, now that the official review is over. Where are we here? Because there was a lot going on in the chat and I was unable to respond to most of it. So let's go back here. Neil Thompson says, every time I listen to your explanations of situations, it clears it up in my head. Cheers. Oh, good. I'm glad that I'm glad that my rapid fire stream of consciousness style actually helps people. I'm never sure if that was the case. Yes. Greetings from Brazil, says Bruno. Hello in Brazil, Bruno. Oh, my goodness. Yes. All right. Yeah. Lots to talk about Vampire. I'm not gonna get into that. I'll get into that more in the Sages Library episode. Oh yeah, Shane in the UK says, Trevor, you used Location Crafter, not Adventure Crafter. They're related but different. Yeah, whatever. They're similar enough that they don't really work for me, for my style. Bruno asks, any chance for a Savage Worlds plus Mythic 2 edition? There's always a chance. I suspect that Season 4, when it eventually comes, will probably not be Savage Worlds, but it probably will be Mythic. I'm not sure. I have a few games as contenders right now, but there's a few things I have to keep in mind. I need to have a game that is interesting to me and is fun for me to play, so it has to have enough mechanical detail to keep me interested, but it can't have so much mechanical detail that it will bog down the sort of playing of the game and the telling of the story, because what that would mean is I would wind up having to cut out a whole bunch of like combat details, for example, if that was happening, because nobody wants to sit there and watch that, or I certainly don't want to sit there and watch that. So I have to find a game that kind of hits the sweet spot, and I may have found it, but we'll see. We shall see. All right. But yeah, if I did use Savage Worlds again, I would probably use a new version, just because that's what everybody's using. And also, Paizo sent me a copy of it. They also sent me a copy of Rifts, like all the Rift stuff. So thanks, Paizo. Or not Paizo, what am I saying? Not Paizo. Sorry, that name's been stuck in my head over the past few weeks for some reason. Not Pig! You wonderful publishers. Can't believe I got that wrong. See, this is why I don't do things live. I can cut out stupid mistakes. Anyway, where are we? Magnificent Devil, do something Free League. Well, it's interesting you say that. They are certainly contenders. Several games of theirs. I'm a big fan of Free League. I'm a big fan of virtually everything they've produced. We have something very big coming up with Free League, actually, using one of their games on my channel, and it's going to be good. It's going to be very, very different than anything I've done so far, but I like to shake things up. I like to do new things, but it's going to be very, very interesting. Oh my goodness, indeed. All right. Stephen Vanderveer says, that could be cool. Simon of the Gang and Riffs. I promise you that will not happen. I'm so glad that Savage Worlds folks sent me Riffs, but Riffs is really not to my taste. I've never been a fan of genre mashing, and that's all that Riffs is. It's literally one giant genre mash. Not my style. It's not my preference at all. But quality products, beautiful products for sure. Yes, everybody's trying to guess what it is now. Well, I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to watch. Keep your eyes to the skies and find out. Forbidden Lands, Mikhail, is a contender for sure. I'm going to do a Sage's Library about Forbidden Lands, because I played a lot of it. I ran a lot of it in my West Marches campaign. Love it. Great game. Not perfect, not without its flaws, but of course, no game is. There's a few things in it that are making me think maybe it's not exactly the right fit for season 4, but it's certainly a contender. We shall see. Yeah, there's Pinnacle. Thank you in the chat. Pinnacle. Wow, boy. All right. Liam asks, do you read a lot of fantasy fiction? Writers and storytellers say that that's important. You're a great storyteller. Well, thank you for that. I prefer to be a good GM rather than a storyteller. For me, running a game is about presenting the world in a natural way that the players, whether that's me or somebody else, feels like it's a consistent world that they can have an effect on if they influence the world through their characters and through the systems of the game in question. I'm hesitant to use the word story at all because that tends to imply, from my experience, that tends to imply forcing a narrative on a player group, and I'm very much against that. Very, very, very much against that. I always prefer to present a world that is evolving and growing and makes sense, but that the players affect and can change based on their character actions. That includes any narratives, and that includes any NPC actions or things that they want to do, right? And when you say, oh, I'm going to tell you a story, it's just, no, I don't want to be told a story by a GM. I want to partake in this experience as a player. I want to be part of this collective experience. I don't want to be told a story. If you want to tell a story, go write the novel, and maybe I'll read the novel, but I don't want that at my game table. That's me, rant over. Hannah K. Hello, channel member Hannah K. I always think of story as something that is applied after the story is done, not while it's being told. You're very old school then, because not a lot of people feel that anyway anymore. I shouldn't say that. From what I've seen, a lot of younger players, especially that have come into the game through D&D 5e and have gone in through the role of, or have been inspired by Critical Role and stuff like that, they tend to be players that seem to think that a D&D game is about being told a story by the GM, that the GM has some story in mind and you go through it. To me, I rebelled against that back in the 80s. I was just like, nah, this is not, this cheapens the true value and power of a role-playing game, right? So yeah, the fact that you say that, Hannah, shows me that you're old school. Old school like me, old school. What do we got here? Man, I wish I finally got enough focus or resolve to play rather than just collect various RPGs on the shelf and drown in all of the ideas that I want to try. I hear you, brother. I hear you. I'm the same way. Like I said earlier in this video, I've got more games on the shelf than I'll ever be able to play. And that breaks my heart a little because every time I look at a game, any one of those games, I look and all I see is the possibilities. I see the possibilities of what that game would be like. And I'll probably never get there. And it's so sad. It's like the scholar thirsty for knowledge who walks into the library of Alexandria and realizes that he will never in 10 lifetimes be able to consume all of the information there. That's me with my role-playing games, you know? Anywho, let's see here. Kaijudo Master 11 says, I really want to just jump in and use Mythic second edition. Can I skip all the pages for now and just use the big summary and the charts to play right away? Well, you could, but you wouldn't necessarily know how to use the charts if you skip the instructions. I'm a big believer that before you can apply shortcuts, you have to be a master of the rules. When we're teaching children, like elementary school children, math, we don't immediately give them calculators, or at least we shouldn't. Because if we give them the shortcuts, they will not build the baseline information they need in order to truly understand the process and internalize that for themselves. So, I would heartily recommend you, take some time and, God forbid, actually read the book. Oh, you don't have to read everything. It's a source book. No one ever reads a source book cover to cover. I shouldn't say no one. I'm sure there are people that do it. I don't. To this day, I look at the first edition DMG from AD&D, and there's whole swaths of that book I never read because it's a source book. You don't need to read everything. But in this case, yes, Kaijudo Master, I would definitely recommend reading at least the basics in the beginning so you understand what the tables are trying to achieve. Okay, Gideon. Also, what do you think about Cortex Prime for it? Cortex Prime. Is that one that I have? No, I don't have the Cortex system, and I'm unfamiliar with it. I have the Monty Cook Cipher system here. They were good enough to send me a copy of that. Very interesting game. It's actually, it is a contender for season 4, I'll tell you that. Anyway, Hannah's leaving. Thanks for joining, Hannah. Thanks for coming. And Behorn says, time to plod through the Mythic 2e PDF. Well, I wouldn't say plodding. It's very inspiring. It's an inspiring book to read, and it'll be very useful for those of you who are looking to, throw some random stuff into your games, be they solo or be they with a live group of people, whether that's on a real table or a virtual one. Panosh, one of my patrons, why do you prefer Mythic over Ironsworn? I don't necessarily. I think both are good at doing their own thing. Mythic is a great tool overall. Ironsworn is very specific to its setting and its style, and it does that very well. Now, I know there's a ton of people who have done all kinds of hacks on Ironsworn. I mean, John Tompkin himself actually did one. It's called Starforged. It's a sci-fi hack of Ironsworn. But Ironsworn, to me, is very specific. It's very, it's designed to do a thing, and it does it very, very, very well. But I wouldn't necessarily use that for other things. Whereas Mythic is more broad. Mythic is more general. So I don't necessarily prefer Mythic over Ironsworn. For example, if I was to play Ironsworn again, I wouldn't use Mythic. I don't have to. I've got the Ironsworn tables, right? And they're great for what they do. So, Ben McCabe, your mention of bennies from Savage Worlds made me curious. How did you manage the spending of bennies on behalf of the GM? I didn't really. So what he's referring to in Savage Worlds is if you're running sort of a traditional game, then the players have a number of bennies per session, typically 3, and the GM has a number of bennies per session, which is more or less based on the number of players at the table that they can use for NPCs, okay? Well, when you're solo playing, there is no GM and player separation. So all I did, I sort of handled bennies in a very unorthodox way, sort of. I would just give Simon 3 bennies at the beginning of every session, unless he was in the middle of a fight or something from the previous session. They didn't replenish that. But I would give him his 3 bennies, and that's that. So enemies didn't have bennies. Bad guys didn't have rerolls. It was all just based on Simon. And then eventually, he could spend his bennies. I think, did I give Edbert and Arn bennies in Savage Worlds when they became proper PCs? I can't remember if I did or not. Anyway, so that's that. So I kind of did my own version of it, but same deal. Okay. Well, guys. Oh, Thomas Rani asks, have you used the Delve rules in Ironsworn? How do you feel about them versus Perilous Wilds? Yeah, I used the Delve rules to great effect in Season 2 of the show, in the Ironsworn version, where Arn is heading north, way north, tracking his nemesis. And I used them when he was in the island of the Husk. He was exploring the under tunnels and such at the Husk. I used them a number of times. They were great. How do you feel about them versus Perilous Wilds? Just a different experience. They focus on slightly different things. But, I'm a system junkie, so I love multiple systems. I love different systems. I would never just say, I'm only going to do this. I'm only going to use Perilous Wilds for this. Because I love learning new things, right? So that is that. Anywho, I think we're good here. We've been going on a bit. Oh boy, almost an hour and a half. Yes. So that is part 2 of the review. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. I hope that it was helpful and I hope it was useful. And if it was, please do hit like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you've not done so already, or become a YouTube channel member, or join us on Patreon. Or if you want to help out the show, you can purchase the Mythic emulator via the drive-thru link below, or, in fact, any of the products I've used on the channel via the drive-thru links below. Or if you want to buy yourself a t-shirt or a mug or a dice bag or something like that, you can do so at memyselfanddie.com and get some handmade merchandise. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. This was super fun, and we will be back next time. I think the next thing I'm going to do is another episode of 5 Parsecs from Home, because they're about to go and find the stash and have the big fight against who? Only the dice will tell. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time on Me, Myself, and Die. Now, hit the button so you don't look stupid as you try and end